Hey, Katie. We have a clue in the diary. We are on chapter 14, an arrest. The traffic light turned green, and the three girls began to cross the street. Nancy made a point of staying in front of the two men who had said they were going to see that someone, presumably Joe Swenson, was arrested. Who are these men? She wondered. Detectives? Or are they the employee of Raybould? If Mr. Swenson is innocent, he mustn't be sent to jail. Nancy immediately made up her mind what she would do. Meet Honey's father, if possible, show him the diary, and ask him to translate some of it. Then I'll decide what to do next, and whether or not to warn Mr. Swenson of his possibly being arrested. He and his family shouldn't have to suffer such disgrace if it's unwarranted. When the girls reached the opposite curb, Nancy took her friend's arms and whispered, "Come on, hurry! We have work to do!" They ran to Nancy's car. Nancy handed the keys to George. "Will you drive so I'll be free to hop out and get hold of Mr. Swenson the instant he comes to the gate?" George took the wheel, and they made record time to the factory. She parked in the first space beyond the front of the gate and left the engine running. "You girls watch for those men we overheard. I'll look for Joe Swenson," Nancy directed. As she spoke, the 4 o'clock whistle blew. "He'll be out any minute now," George exclaimed. Anxiously, the girls scanned the faces of the workmen as they came from the building. "Where is he?" Bess fretted. At that moment, Nancy caught sight of the inventor. She alighted and called his name. With a smile of friendly recognition, he came over to the car. "Jump in," Nancy invited, indicating the rear seat. "We'll give you a lift." "Why, thanks," the inventor returned gratefully. "I live on the south side. Another fellow and I share a room at the outskirts of town. I imagine it's out of your way." "Not at all," Nancy assured him with a worried glance up and down the street. In her haste to leave the plant area, Nancy climbed in and almost pulled the man in after her. She asked George to press the button to roll up the convertible's top. "A man certainly appreciates a ride home after a hard day on his feet," Swenson remarked, leaning back against the cushion. "I'm not yet accustomed to standing 8 hours, but I'll be all right in a week or so. I'm glad to earn a little money by any means, after being out of work for so long." As George drove down the street, Nancy said, "Mr. Swenson, the mystery about your lost letters has been solved." Quickly, she explained about the mail clerk who had been arrested. The inventor was shocked and shook his head sadly. "I'm glad he's been caught, but what an unfortunate thing for him to do. He probably has a family, and they'll suffer with him. Crimes, big or little, are so useless. Whatever profits they may bring are always temporary." Nancy nodded. She was becoming more convinced every minute that Joe Swenson was an honest person. "I have another surprise," she said. "Your diary was picked up near the drive to the Raybould house." She took the journal from her handbag. "Would you mind translating some of the Swedish for me?" "My diary! Oh, how lucky!" Almost affectionately, he began to turn the pages. "Here's an item about Honey's birthday, how she loved the little toy I made for her. I was always planning to try and market those mechanical dolls, but I never got to it." George interrupted to ask which direction to take, and Nancy said, "Oh, let's just ride out into the country." She wanted to elude the men who intended to arrest Mr. Swenson until she could make up her mind what to do. Suddenly, the inventor's face darkened. "Here's a note about Felix Raybould," he translated. "I have been warned by my friend, Anson Heilberg, not to let Raybould see my invention, but I shall take a chance. I must, because I need money for rent and food. He will give me in advance." Mr. Swenson remarked bitterly, "How I wish I had listened to Anson. Felix Raybould would not give me another cent or any part of a royalty from the use of my electrochemical process for putting ceramic finish on steel." "How terribly unfair!" Bess cried out as the other girls expressed the same opinion. Nancy then told the inventor that a friend of hers had found the signet ring. "I'll see that it is returned to you," she assured him. "Well, that is good news," said Mr. Swenson. Nancy gradually switched the conversation to the Raybould fire and said, "The investigators report that the explosions in the house could have been caused by a freak accident. A television set not working properly, a defective electronic heating device set off some sort of explosive stored in the cellar. Mr. Swenson, have you any idea what really happened at the Rayboulds?" Mr. Swenson looked at Nancy searchingly. My answer might explain a good many angles of the case, he said slowly. As you probably know, it's against the law to store explosives without a permit. I believe Felix Raybould was breaking that law. He probably was in the house waiting for me and accidentally caused the explosion himself. But they found no evidence of a body, Bess spoke up with a shudder. Mr. Raybould undoubtedly escaped and then disappeared, knowing he would be arrested, the inventor said vehemently. But you didn't see him run out? Nancy queried. No. We should have looked for footprints, but I guess it's too late now, Nancy remarked. Oh, why didn't we think of that? Bess murmured. She had turned around to watch the rear window for any pursuers. Suddenly she gasped, Police! George had just passed a side road. From it shot a car with 2 state troopers. When it turned in their direction, George said grimly, I hope they're not after us. All the occupants of the convertible grew tense, but Nancy said, Let's just keep going at the same speed. Let's not act guilty. By this time, she was convinced of Mr. Swenson's innocence and hoped fervently that the officers were not pursuing her car. Nancy doubted they would take her word about the truth of the inventor's story. Maybe they're after someone else, for speeding, Bess said, although without conviction. Nancy stole a glance out the rear window. Her spirits sank. The state police car was gaining on them, but it did not look as though it was going to pass the convertible. An uneasy thought crossed Nancy's mind. If those troopers are after Joe Swenson, then George, Bess, and I might be arrested for aiding a suspected criminal to escape. George was supposed to slow down for a sharp curve. Directly beyond it, 2 men were driving a small herd of cattle across the highway. What luck! George cried, slowing down. She honked her horn and tried to edge through, but only succeeded in frightening the cows so that they stood motionless. The convertible came to a halt. Behind it, the police car drew nearer. Nancy had a sudden impulse to tell Joe Swenson to duck down out of sight, then checked herself. Such an action would indeed make officers suspicious. Instead, she slipped the diary into her handbag. Nancy glanced at her companion. Mr. Swenson's face was grim. The police car pulled up alongside the convertible. Nancy's heart was in her throat, but she tried not to show any agitation. The 2 herdsmen had headed the cows off to the side of the road. Affecting nonchalance, George started to drive off, but a shout from the trooper's car stopped her. Hold on! One of the officers cried out. Pull over! They were following us, Bess groaned. Quickly, Nancy whispered to Joe Swenson. Don't worry, we'll stick by you. The officers had jumped out. They strode up to the convertible. We've had a call to pick up this car, said one, while the other thrust his face through the open rear door window and peered intently at Mr. Swenson. This is the man, he declared. What do you mean? Nancy demanded coolly, with as much conviction as she could muster. Are you Joe Swenson? The trooper barked, ignoring Nancy's question. Yes. You are wanted by the Mapleton police for deliberately setting the Raybould house on fire. At this accusation, the girls gasped, and Joe Swenson blanched. Then a flush of anger mounted to his cheeks. What nonsense is this? You haven't a shred of proof. I don't know anything about the fire. You have the wrong man. Well, you can explain that at headquarters. You'll have to come along with us. The less trouble you make, the better it will go for you. One of the troopers slipped a pair of handcuffs from his pocket. Joe Swenson shrank back. Don't put them on, please. I'll come without any trouble. Okay, but don't try any funny stunts. Climb out and be quick about it. Just a minute, officer, Nancy interposed. Aren't you making a mistake? I feel sure Mr. Swenson isn't the man you're after. Please let him go free. I'll be responsible for his appearance in court. Joe Swenson added, I started working at Baylor Weston's factory just recently. I don't mind answering your questions, but if I'm detained in jail, I'll lose my job. Protest was useless. Joe Swenson gave Nancy a courageous, apologetic smile and alighted. You girls will have to come along too, the officer announced. Drive on ahead, and not too fast. You have some explaining to do too. Don't try to get away. Uh-oh. Ooh, I'll have to find